From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your Professional Misfits. Hello friends, all the way from Sydney, Australia, I'm Christopher Sellers.
And from Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Ipox.
And for episode 9 on the Professional Misfits, we brought a friend. Say hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul. I couldn't help myself.
Well, excellent. So Paul Watkins is a friend of mine. We brought him in from LinkedIn. And Paul, it's fair to say that you're a drug dealer. That's correct?
I am a licensed drug dealer. Terminology is important. Details matter, Chris.
It is. A pharmacist. So for the folks at home, maybe you can give... Actually, for episode 9, ladies and gents, we're talking about, does school prepare you for life? That's the topic for this conversation. So season 1 is all about professional development. And now at the tail end of episode 9, we're discussing whether school and education, training, all of these things, do they prepare you adequately for the challenges that you're going to face in the rest of life? And the reason I brought Paul in is we met on LinkedIn. And we seem to occupy the uncomfortable corner of LinkedIn discussion, where we're not selling sales tips and tricks or quick, easy to guides. It's sort of more deeper discussions of like, look, just do the work to get the results that you want, whether it's creativity or anything. And Paul, I'll hand over to you here if you can give folks at home maybe about a 30-second introduction into who you are, what you do, and sort of like what drives you on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I've probably built multiple careers out of doing things that I'm uniquely unqualified to do in any way, shape, or form. So I've done everything from sweep floors in hairdressers to teach people how to Olympic weightlift to hang off mountains in weird corners of the world, you name it. So I am classically trained as a pharmacist. So, did the school, the degree, get out and work. Turned out not the world's greatest pharmacist, but I'm actually really good at running businesses and building teams. So ended up being chronically successful, had really great businesses that nearly killed me, literally. And so, desire to not die at work, I got out and took up mountain climbing because that's what you do. And then out of a desire not to die on a mountain somewhere, I ended up taking up ultra running because that's what you do. And in between all that, I took up a career of being a chippy and being a keynote speaker. So you name it, I've kind of done it. Despite coming out with a science degree and being the least athletic human in high school you've ever met.
So you're a misfit. You fit the brief. You fit the brief for being a misfit. Then that's what it is.
Yeah, my life makes people go, oh, you must have had a wonderful plan. Like, I had zero plan. That's the point. There has been no grand plan, and that's led me to do things that I've just never imagined I would ever do in a million years. If I had a year 12 yearbook or a photo, it'd say guy least likely to do all the stuff he ends up doing. My life makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I think then you're in the right place. You're in the right place. So to get us kicked off, gents, school, education gets a bad rap, especially in the modern age of the internet and, school didn't teach me anything and history is all wrong. I think for interest's sake, I'd like to start with, well, what is school good for? And what does it prepare you for? Paul, I'll give you a bit of breathing space, and Brody, I'll push you under this bus because we talked briefly about it. So you might have a few ideas of what school is useful for. And you've got kids of your own as well. So you must have some aspirations of what an education might do for them.
Yeah. And look, I'll state this right out front. I'm a little different. I didn't complete any secondary schooling. I didn't go to college. That wasn't a course I took. And actually, I dropped out of high school. So I didn't complete the same amount of school as most people did. And I still fundamentally think there's an importance of it. I think it's a little different for me. I think it lies more in the social structure of school and the real life experience and interaction with other human beings. People aren't always the kindest, aren't always the greatest. You have to learn how to survive that a little bit, and you have to be exposed to those situations. And it's really hard as, a homeschooler or someone that isn't attending school to place yourself in those situations. My last 2 years of high school should have been my highest level of social interaction, and they were my least. And that was hard. You know what I mean? So I believe that school has its place. It's funny enough that I don't think it's actually for education, but I do think it, and maybe not education in the traditional sense, right? But like this kind of social education that we're talking about. And that's really its importance for me. And I know that it has its place.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. Paul, your take, seeing as you've gone through, a fairly academic career. Like, is it 4 or 5 years of uni to be a pharmacist, or?
Yeah, it's 5 years. It's 4 years plus an apprenticeship. So like an old school apprenticeship, like you go out and you work for a full year, and then you have an exam at the end, which is a board exam. So literally you just sit in front of a bunch of older people who can ask you anything they want about anything in the last 5 years that you've done. So it's a fairly long course. But I'm kind of opposite to Brody in that I've done the full educational gamut. Like I've done high school to year 12. I was a scholarship academic student. I've done the bachelor's degree. I've got an MBA, and even got very close to kicking off a PhD a couple of years ago. So, and I'm married to a principal. So I'm like, I've got the full educational tick, I thought
Nerds.
yeah. That's a good point, though. Like,
Yeah.
I think school prepares you to a degree that you want it to prepare you. Like, I think the social structure and the interaction is a really good point.
Yeah.
You have to understand how to function in society to some level, and not everyone is nice, and not everyone shares, and you're going to have to kind of figure out how to navigate that. I do think when we lump in school, you almost have to divest like early school from that middle section, that high school section, because that early school really is about fundamentals, like learning how to learn, which I think is crucial. And I think people, particularly in modern day, get a little confused about what teachers are meant to do and what parents are meant to do. And I think there needs to be better clarity around, as a parent, like you actually have to be really active in teaching your children how to learn and what that looks like and feels like and interaction and all that. So I think early school was really good. I think the structure works and the concept works. That middle block of high school, I think, is different. It really is about, you're going to get out of it what you want. And I speak to like literally thousands of high school
I was about to say, you do a lot of
students.
keynote speakers
of,
with
like,
high school kids as
school
well.
students.
So
yeah, year 11 and year 12. And it's the key thing that I say to them that seems to resonate is, A, you're going to screw it up. You're going to fail. You're going to screw this up. And you're going to end up in a career that you're never going to finish in. That's okay. If you have no idea who you are or what you want to do, also okay, and kind of where you should be at this point. And when you tell them that, you discover how tightly wound up they are. Like, people have their entire identity wound up in what score did I get, and therefore what career am I going to have?
Yeah. And what entry, that's it. Like, what course can I get into given the score that I get? And that's mapped out for the next 5 to 10. Yeah.
But I think school serves a purpose in getting people to understand that there's a discipline in learning. What you learn maybe not be that important, but learning how to learn is really important, because at some point, whether you like it down the track, you're going to find something you love that you need to learn. And having an understanding of how to do that is really good, or how to argue your point or stand your ground or whatever it is, not just physically but intellectually. So I think there's some value in that. So for me, it's more about take the skills and the fundamentals out of school if you can, and then have them in your pocket for down the track. What you got, the degree, the score, whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's, did you learn how to learn and get those fundamentals right? Problem is,
it's interesting.
At 16, you don't give a shit about any of that. Like,
no.
Well,
but also, and also, like, it's easier to talk as sort of like grown professionals in a certain capacity. Again, like 16, 17, 18, even into your early 20s, you're still heavily swayed by what my parents want from me. Am I going to make them proud? Like, what does my girlfriend think? What are my boys doing? All these sorts of things. So there's a lot of other probably social pressures that you're probably more susceptible to and probably more unaware of in those early years when you're trying to figure out like who you are and what the fuck it is that you want to do. It's really interesting to hear you talk about it in this way, Paul, because it echoes a lot of the conversations Brody and I have had in previous episodes. Like episode 1 is literally like, what's the purpose of work? And it was this big discussion of, well, do you find your passion first before you find the gig, or do you got to try a few things and maybe get a bit of money in your pocket? And all of this is trial and error. Like it's not clean. And even when I remember, moving out of, for me, high school, it was like, well, you're going to university, and that was a given.
Yeah.
And then I got glandular fever for my HSC. So over here, Brody, like our final year exams are either HSC or ATAR now. I don't know. Anyway, you get it. So yeah. So tanked my exams for glandular fever, and I've never seen my father more disappointed in his life. But luckily, in inverted commas, because I had glandular fever and it was established, I could get into a bridging course for uni, which is sort of like this limbo of where you can do a year of uni to make up for like your exam. And so I did that, and then got a score of like 90 something plus. So I could have gone on to study rocket science 101. And the irony is, my old man was like, oh yeah, but that was easy for you. I'm like, you motherfucker, I can't win. So right. But so I think for school, for me, yeah, likewise. And it's funny because it wasn't until I got into uni and then I did that bridging course, and that was fine. Then went into about first year arts education, and then realized, like, the fuck is this? It's all essays. It's all essays. This is a bit ridiculous. Even the arts, it's all essays. And so once I got into uni, I realized this isn't for me, and then ended up sort of doing into other things before I fell into acting college, which was 3 years full time and a heavier caseload than anything at university anyway, because it was Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And when you weren't training, you were learning, rehearsing, script analysis, all this sort of shit. So I would stack professional arts training against any other degree or craft to this day. But to the point of whether education prepares us for life, similar to you guys, I think there's fundamentals. Paul, you made a really good point about separating primary school out from high school, because, for everyone that bags school, there's all the things you take for granted, like basic literacy, like ABC 1, 2, 3, all these sorts of things, grammar, punctuation, which matter despite what Grammarly tells you. These skills, I think your point of like learning how to learn is an excellent one, because that's a lifelong skill. That's something that I talk about a lot when it comes to creative process, because there is no generic standardized process. There's skills you can have, but unfortunately you're going to have to learn what pieces go together on your own and how they work for you. And that's going to be the same for most of life. There isn't a standard template to pretty much anything we do. So learning, and to your point, learning how to troubleshoot. Like if everything you've learned now isn't working, then what do you do? If it's not in the handbook, if you haven't been taught this thing. And to borrow a principle from what you were talking about, Brody, and I know we agree on this, like if where school is a massive social education, especially with co-ed schools. Like in Sydney, there's quite a few private schools which are single sex, which I've always maintained as a cruel social experiment. Because like I remember, for instance, I remember being 14, 15, 16, you might have your first, high school girlfriend, which lasts a week, and then you break up. But now you have to see her every day. And you have to see her and her friends who whisper and gossip about you in the corridors, right? And then you have to hear like her friend, weren't you going out with Rachel? And you have to deal with this shit. Now, I would rather deal with this uncomfortable, awkward, gross shit at 14 than at 21.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And and have no idea, or just be one of these Andrew Tate bros who like, fuck it, like women are shit, like they don't know what they want. And like, no, bro, you're emotionally retarded. Like you've never experienced rejection. You've never experienced rejection. But yes, it does suck. That's kind of the point. Like you're either going to have to grow up. You're going to have to grow up and realize that maybe their opinion doesn't matter, and she's bitter and hurt as well, and and work out this mess that is a social education and how to function like a, sane, rounded human being, because you think any of this shit changes once you hit an office or once you grow
Oh,
up,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
I'd rather learn about a breakup at 12, 13, 14 than at 25.
yeah.
And ironically, this was the feedback I was listening to other students at uni in that first year education degree, about girls who had gone through an all girls school and then get to 18, 19, where they're allowed out, they can drink alcohol, they can meet boys, but they've got no idea what to say or do
Blindsided.
because there's been no exposure.
Mm.
Okay, so there's a we've talked a little bit about the social education in terms of like a hard skills, life skills sort of criteria. Do you feel that education as it stands satisfies the needs for like the modern student heading into the workplace? Because that's fundamentally what education is to skill you to be competent to fulfill some sort of role. Do you guys feel like education is satisfying that at any particular level? Paul, I'll go to you first if that's all right.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll give Brody some breathing room on that one. I think it really depends on how you evaluate competence in terms of not in terms
Yeah.
of what degree are you going into, but what are we validating as competence? Like I look back at my kind of senior years at school now, and that's a long time ago. And I think about what lessons or subjects or what was the things that were formative for me that I took away and said that was something that I use all the time, and they were
Right.
non-curriculum stuff. Like we had a lecture.
You mean
And
it
we were
wasn't on
talking
the
about,
exam, is what you're saying?
yeah, it was non-examinable. Like
Outrageous.
yeah,
Outrageous.
I know, non-examinable material. Our headmaster came in once and gave us a lecture. Like he gives a Year 12 a lecture. It's like it's non-examinable, and he just came in and he did Rudyard Kipling's "If" and went through the poem.
Oh,
And he
great
just
poem.
tore that apart about what it meant. This was an all boys school and talked about what it meant to have those characters as a man and that kind of stuff. Um, I got more out of that than like 3 years of any other geography, or I did 5 years of French. Oh, like those things were like that stuck. So it depends on what you're
Yeah.
looking for competence. And I think it also
Yeah.
depends on, and again, I kind of come back to this aspect of what's happening outside the school is as parents, how are we preparing your kids to go in and be receptive to some of these lessons, and they come home and have an attitude about A, B, or C. Well, what are you reflecting there? What are you teaching them and that kind of stuff? So I
Yeah.
think the risk is people go, oh, is school preparing or doing this or doing that? You're like, school is a component preparing you for life. And there's like all these other components, and you can't pick one and blame it, but you have to you can have an opinion on it and you can reflect on it and you can improve it, but you've
Yeah.
got to also look at it in totality with everything else.
It's a really excellent
Says the
point
guy with
because
like multiple degrees defending the education
no,
department.
no, no. But that to me that signifies like a discernment of what it's for and what it's not, and you've chosen accordingly, right? Because the case in Australia, Brady, I'm not quite sure if it's the same in the States, but education in the schooling system is so often used as a scapegoat of like the
Mm.
reason why kids X, Y, and Z is because the education system, like slash teachers, are at fault. And of course they've obviously had a horrific time through COVID
Mm.
Same
and
narrative
trying.
here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Horrific time during COVID trying to online tutor children who can't see their friends who are stuck in their room, right? It's
Hmm.
this sort of experience. So, in your experience, Brody, do you find that education is satisfying or can adequately satisfy the needs for kids, like either heading into the workforce who want a career or guiding them, I guess, to some sort of
Mm.
passion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be transparent. I wish I would have stuck with it a little bit further than I had, because again, those kind of transformative years from like 15 to 20, if I had given myself the structure which that system provides and had pulled the lessons from show up, do your work, learn where you can, and apply yourself,
Mm.
I would be worlds ahead of where I am now, because, I had the creative pieces. I had the internal drives and those ambitions, but I lacked the structure. So I think it does a wonderful job of preparing kids to do exactly that. And I think Paul made a fantastic point. It's also up to the parents to nurture within each individual child their own kind of scope of this world and what they want from it and what they're taking in and, receiving, because you can go to school and become a cog in the machine, right? That's a very easy place to be. But you can also go to school, have a successful career and stability, and be nurturing a passion or another hobby, or climbing mountains, or whatever that may be. And it takes a village, so if you have all of the pieces for the kids that are going through this system, I think they're at the highest advantages. But to make it simple, I think it does a good job of putting you into a place where you can understand, hey, I need to show up, this is what I need to do, and this is the times in which I function in that world, and then that's what it is.
So
I do
there's
wonder.
something,
Hold on.
what you guys are both, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
I do wonder though, some of the things and Brody mentioned about training kids to have a structure around, doing work, like actually turning up on a regular basis and producing a body of work and doing that is really good. I question now whether the system, and I'm out of it, so I don't know, but I feel that in talking to students, it may not prepare them for failure. It doesn't prepare them for the concept
Yeah.
that you can still do everything right and it doesn't pan out the way you want, and that's okay,
Yeah.
and that's part of the process. So, we can equip them like, oh, you're going to come out and have knowledge of chemistry, maths, and all that kind of stuff, but emotionally, like, how do I handle the fact that my career ended up being not what I thought it was going to be, or I thought I was going to be really good at this, and it turns out that I'm rubbish at it, or AI stole my job and I've had to go out and reinvent myself, or whatever it is. I'm not sure whether the schools prepare people for that, and even if it is their job to prepare people for that, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's probably an opportunity somewhere in there. But again, you get back to that point of going, well, what do you want the teachers to do? Like, how far do you want to go with this in terms of who is responsible?
How much do you want to put on their plate? Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, like I look at my wife. So she's a school principal in a primary school. So it's a primary school scenario. But the vast majority, and by vast, I mean vast majority of students here have a trauma background. So that a lot of her work is just dealing with, how do I get this child to a place where they can actually be ready to learn? And that takes up a whole heap of time before you even start the learning. So that's really important work. But then you can't then come back and go, well, why isn't my kid up to this level or that level? You're like, well, I had to unwind and unpack them for half the day before I could even get to that point. So it's that thing of going, again, coming back to, it takes a village, as Brody said. You've really got to embrace the fact of going, everyone's got a role to play. And it's very easy to do that versus this and go, okay, hang on, what's my role in this? How do I support that? And you can still constructively complain. Like we had parent-teacher interviews last night. The teacher ran through what our kids are doing academically. I'm like, I actually don't need to know that. I want to know how they're doing socially. What are their friend groups like? What do they do at recess? Are they sitting alone? Are they having great mates? How are they? Like, I need to know the things that
are they happy?
Report.
Yeah.
Are they happy? Like, I assume they are. But I want something verifiable. So I think there's a lot of that responsibility to play a part in the whole process.
So that overall, I agree. It's interesting. There's something I talk about in my book, Applied Creativity, where if we have a demand for creative skill sets, and the first question we should ask is, why don't we have them? And I make the case that we don't have a creativity problem. We more have a values problem. And if you don't value creative intelligence, and if you don't value creative skills, X, Y, and Z, then of course you're never going to develop them. And the education is symptomatic of a society's values. And that also starts in the home, right? So, and I can testify to the fact that creativity was never on the fucking agenda in my house. Like my old man's an engineer, my mother's a medical professional. So it was academia. and you were graded and valued by your report card and your exam results. And so with that in mind, and this is, I guess, the hard facts of structural education, is that we can holistically observe and discuss the principles that should be at play. The Monday to Friday, the semester, the entrances, the qualifications, vetting and assessments, all this sort of shit comes down to an exam grade as it stands. And so kids are trained over a period of 10 to 12 years before tertiary education that the values and the thinking, or even the quality of whatever, isn't important, because all you're valuing me is on you want a quick answer that's acceptable. That's what you want.
On a standardized scale.
Yeah, like,
I'm
the teacher
scared.
asks a question, the first one to put their hand up is the smartest and the brightest, right? And so we have this problem. And so I guess I'm asking for guys and parents and mums and dads and students who aren't us. And if the world only cares about my grade, Paul, there's no way you'd be a pharmacist if you didn't get the correct grades. It doesn't matter how much of a nice guy you were. If you didn't have the academic marks to support it, best of luck. Go work the front counter instead.
Yeah.
So
I'm a pharmacist because I didn't get the right grade. I was trying to get into medicine and I was 1 point short. I ended up being a pharmacist because I didn't get the right grade. I'm just going to shut my door because I got some noise outside. You like, really
go on, do that. Good at Brody. I'll throw it to you then, man, because obviously, I'm going to read between the lines and say, obviously, this was your experience. Like, here's the tattered jack of all social media, and we're like, hey, bro, I need you to score an A+ consistently over the next 3 to 4 years, and you just went, that's not in my DNA. This isn't going to work for me. So
yeah, and that's kind of what it was. And like I said, and it was weird. And this was the naive, ignorant 16-year-old kid thinking that he had learned everything socially that he needed to learn. I've got this place figured out on that side. And then, yeah, on the education side of it, I really, at a young age, notice the same things that you're pointing out. I was like, okay, I'm regurgitating information that they told me 20 minutes ago. And if I do it in the way and format that they want me to, I'm going to get the appropriate grade to satisfy my place in this spectrum. And it felt weird. It felt weird. I felt like I was looking for a little bit deeper than that, and God, it makes me sound like I'm not sure what it actually was, but yeah, I noticed those things young, but I will say this again, wish that I would have had the capacity or maybe the guidance or whatever it is that, hey, even though you have these feelings, those are going to hit you later in life too. Okay. You're going to be 25 years old. You're going to be 30 years old, and those are going to arise again. And you've been somewhere for 5-10 years. So now you really got to work through it. Is this what it is to me? Can I make it through the system? It serves me functionally and financially, it serves its purpose. I wish I had that, because again, I've had to reestablish that for myself. And, that's a much harder bet,
Yeah. So let's flip the coin on this for a minute, because when you hear the story, when you hear the narrative of every entrepreneur, of every professional creative, of every pro athlete, when you hear that Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard, when you hear that X, Y, and Z, didn't finish uni or quit school, like, the narrative is generally the same. Like, school doesn't teach X, Y, Z. Whether it should or shouldn't or whatever else, but there's this magical thing that school doesn't teach, but I had it and I had to go out and find it. And so what this sort of sets up is school seems to provide a base level of educational competence or literacy or whatever it happens to be. And then way down the other end of the spectrum, you've got exceptionalism. So you've got the exceptionals that do something above and beyond what the layperson think is capable. And this is something that I chimed in with Paul on one of his posts. I think it's just before you went up to Laplandia, Paul, because it was one of those posts on LinkedIn about how, there's no magic, do the work. Like, you need to get fit. The mountain doesn't care, what you think or feel. Like, if you're not prepared and you haven't done the work, the mountain will say fuck off and you won't make it to the summit. Yeah. So there's, and I sort of commented at the time that there's some direct parallels between the exceptional creative and the exceptional adventurer, where to the layperson it seems like magic or gifts or talented or genius or X, Y, and Z, but for the person who's doing it, it's like, no, there's just a lot of work that you don't see that you could do, but for whatever your choices, you choose not to. So
you almost
my question is then
glorifies it.
Yeah. And when and to be fair, like when the majority say they're gifted, and for you to be the minority to go, no, there's a lot of work here. It's just I've done a lot more, over time. Oh no, but there always seems to be a qualification. It's cognitive dissonance. Like, I can't possibly conceive that this is achievable or tangible to me, an average person. So it must be exceptional.
Very uncomfortable.
It is, isn't it? And that's probably a discussion for a whole other podcast, my man, and we'll definitely get there. But so here in this limbo of like leaving school, this giant black hole, and then the exceptionalism on the other side, like what's that gap? Like, what could be taught? What could be facilitated? What could be illuminated in that sense for the average Joe and Jane? And Paul, I'm going to throw this one to you.
Yeah, I think there's two issues.
Actually, Paul, so I will let you answer. And if you can, in doing so, could you give us the little story? Because in doing that, I will let you answer because I have a habit of cutting people off, apparently. So in doing so, can you give us a bit of background on your recent trip up to the Arctic around Sweden? Because you've just got back and it's a super fucking cool story and people deserve to hear it.
Yeah, so in answer to your question, I think one of the issues is knowledge. Like, that's solvable by, you take your story of exceptionalism, Zuck dropped out and did this and Elon dropped out and did this, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the numbers, like more unicorn companies have been started by PhDs than dropouts or bachelors or whatever put together.
Correct.
Like, it's actually the guys that grounded out and who aren't really Twitterable or Insta famous who actually use all the money. So part of it is knowledge of talking to particularly students to go, you know what? They're not real. They're outliers. They're so outliers that it's ridiculous. So stop putting yourself on that pedestal. The guys that are doing really well you don't hear about, they just did the work. That's all they did. They just followed a normal path, and you can do that. And the other issue is, from a society point of view, we celebrate the outliers because they're sexy and it sells and you get clicks.
Yeah, it's a great story.
The guy who did year 12 and then got a degree and then grounded out for 20 years and then sold it to a tech bro and made a ton. Because it doesn't sound exciting, so it kind of disappears. Where have I been for the last week? So, because I'm normal, I was up in northern Sweden. So I've been up in the Laplandian Arctic, which sounds really romantic, but it's just a very, very cold place in northern Sweden, not far off Finland, doing a super long winter ultra, which is my niche thing. 503 kilometers.
So for context, for those who don't know, like, I'm in Sydney, Australia, which is in the middle of the South Pacific, and Paul's further south than me. He's down around Melbourne. So for him to go from Melbourne to north of Sweden is probably going as far as you can possibly go from the south to the north. Please continue. Yeah.
So I can literally look out my window and see the Southern Ocean. I'm that south. And then I've gone 30 hours north, like 26,000 miles or kilometers or whatever it was, to walk 503 kilometers. Now, this is it's an ultra marathon, but it's a single stage self-supported. So they put you on the start line. They go, you've got 503 kilometers to go. It's in the wilderness, like full Europe's last wilderness, like Laplandian Arctic. 503 kilometers. You've got 10 days to get the job done. You operate day and night, 24/7, always open, we never close. Go. There's no stage. There's you. You must be self-sufficient. You're going to drag your supplies. You'll drag your water. There's some checkpoints along the way. We'll give you some water there. We will hopefully give you a meal there. You may or may not be able to sleep there, most likely not. And have at it. And on a good day, it'll be -15. And on a bad day, it'll be -35. And have at it, bro. That's my niche sport. And
that's my hobby. That's what I do for fun.
That's what I was going to say. This is fun.
Yeah. It's type. People say you can have type 2 fun. This is type 3 fun. This is way out on the spectrum. Why do you do that? I said, well, know what you're good at. Like, I just through iteration.
I'm good at walking long distances on my own. I love it. I love it.
It's one of those things of going, I iterated. Like, I just found over time and experience that I built a skill set that I'm very good at very long, very cold, and highly technically difficult events. The longer it is, the colder it is, and the more technically difficult it is, the better I do. You stick me in a race at home, 100K, 100 mile or whatever, I'm middle of the pack, bro, all day, every day. But you put me out in an event that's long, cold, difficult, technically complex, and operates 24/7 for a very long period of time, and I will generally outwork almost anyone on the planet. That's kind of where I work. And I qualify by going, like, I'm not an athlete, Olympian, or astronaut. Like, I'm a nerdy, stay-at-home, work-from-home dad with bad eyesight and, like, low stature. Like, I just have figured out that if you make good quality decisions and you are disciplined around executing those, regardless of how cold, hungry, tired, starving, hallucinating, or freezing you are, you will generally outperform 99.9% of the population. And that's just how I've done.
So what you're saying is you're gifted and you're special, and it was, genetic gifts that only you were born with. Yeah. I am curious, like, how, because obviously this is not something you wake up and decide to do. Like, what were the iterative steps from, I've never run a marathon in it, because correct me if I'm wrong, I read somewhere in one of your earlier posts about it was a journey where you were sort of overweight and overworked, and you sort of become, this is not good for me, and so something shifted for you, and obviously radically, where you swung all the way down the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it was kind of that thing of going, I was very successful at work, but it was going to kill me. Literally, like, you get to the point going, if you die with the most money, you don't win, you're just dead. Like, you don't get a medal. So you get to that point in your career, you're like, is this it? Do I just do this for 30 more years? Or, like, that doesn't, that's not the story I wanted. So I literally I changed careers. Right. I went from pharmacist to chippy, like full change careers. And then I went, I'm sick of being sick and tired. So, but I could run. Like, that was the only sport I could do in school. Like, I had to do sport, and I chose running because I was, too small for footy, too uncoordinated for cricket, too short for basketball. I'll do running. So I got back, I did 5K, and 5K was okay. Then I did 10, then a half marathon, then a marathon. And as part of getting out of work and kind of decompressing, I went to a very basic trek in Nepal. I only went to Nepal because I thought they'd have no Wi-Fi, so work couldn't email me. Like, that's the only reason I went. And I loved it. And then you do the next thing, and then it was really about, you open the door and go through and do what's next. What's the next hardest thing? Now, that has a degree of uncomfortableness with it, because it always means you're walking into a room where everyone else in that room is better than you. Like, they're an order of magnitude better at what you're attempting to do because they've already been in that room for a period of time. So whenever I've really kind of leveled up, it's been because I went into a room where I was the dumbest dude there and, like, order of magnitude below everybody else. But that allowed me to upgrade. And so I did expedition, got into mountain climbing, reached a point in mountain climbing where we were right up the end, as in, like, expeditions where not everyone's coming home. And kind of, well, okay, that's probably as far as we need to push that envelope. Came back. It's okay when you're single, but you get married, you have kids. Came back into running. And same thing, half marathon, marathon, ultra. Hang on, I've got a really weird set of skills. Where can I apply that? Oh, there's winter ultras. Cool. What does that feel like? And then Then you're doing 500 Ks in the Arctic, and that's not the first time I've done that. It's just, but that took 20 years. That was like a 2-decade process.
Right.
And
Right.
none of my, like, a pharmacy degree doesn't help you with that. Well, it helps you understand how to use, anti-inflammatories and what your kidneys are doing and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't equip you for that. I have an MBA. That doesn't help with that. Like, it was really about,
Right.
I learned how to problem solve. I learned how to learn. I learned how to problem solve. So as a non-athlete, like a nerd, I look at these races and events like an equation. How do I solve this? What do I need to do to solve the equation?
Yeah.
And the answer is get to the end. So you break it into parts and you solve the bits, and then you put it back together and you get through. And that's, kind of outwork and outthink, and that's how you get to the end.
Which I would argue, is kind of a structure and system that we were talking about that school could provide. Like we were saying, there's an aspect of that, that preparation that you're talking about, and that discipline and that confidence in your own process. That could be something that, again, if you maybe had someone like you as a mentor that says, hey, look at this process like this and take these pieces from it, that could set someone up to be the next ultra runner. Because I'm telling you, it's not me, Paul.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in, because there was one particular principle that I think that you mentioned, and it's about being the dumbest guy in the room. And I jump on that because school drills exactly the opposite. It's like you're drilled to compete to get better grades than the next person. There's not really an acceptance of like, well, if you've got a C this time, like if you got 60%, like that's okay. Like work for next time, like no. And the more prestigious and elite the school, the higher this competition is, to the point of,
against everyone else. Yeah.
Correct. And to the point of dysfunction and anxiety and all the things that come with it. But this, like the concept of like, well, here's an exam, or here's some form of assessment, and accept that you're going to suck. And we're going to use this assessment as a baseline. And I don't really care where you end up. You know what I mean? Now, would this not, for students, like, would this not take off like a ton of performance pressure, a ton of anxiety, a ton of expectation, a ton of all sorts of things? Like it's on the borderline of the creative principle of play, where it's like, we'll give you a problem, we'll give you a project. And specifically with the sort of exercises or puzzles I design, it's like I design puzzles that have what's the word? Basically multiple potential outcomes. Like I give you a problem and there's like 50 different ways to solve it. Correct. Thank you. There's not fixed solutions. So as opposed to a crossword, which only ever has like one correct solution per box, right? Imagine it's a crossword, but 20 different solutions could fit each of the boxes. And then, and this is the thing, like certain students and certain people who've gone through schooling freak out and go, well, that's fucked. Like, what's the right answer? Just tell me the right answer. I'm like, this is the point, folks. To Paul's point, it's like, well, life doesn't function like this. And if I want to push myself to like if I want to push myself into exceptionalism, or if I want to push myself through disruption, where everything's suddenly, where everyone's suddenly redundant, we have to work from home, I don't know what's going on. How are you going to adapt, cope, solve those things? Do you have the emotional resilience, wisdom, and serenity and grace to deal with it? Would that sort of principle is directly translatable to a schoolroom, I would think. Would that work? Would that help? And obviously it's not examinable. Yeah,
exactly. But you are equipping them with some skills. I mean, as an example, like in this race I was talking about, like I was out there for 8 days. Like it took me 8 days to get the job done. 8 continuous, like 24-hour days. And there was a point at about day 4 or day 5 where I was out the front. So there was myself and another guy, a German athlete, and we were 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. And there was a day there where I was in front. It was a 75K section from this point to that point. And like that's about a 23-hour slog when you're dragging a 25-kilo sled in the snow.
Right. Yeah.
And we fought it out. Like we fought for he was 2Ks behind me. And for like 22 hours, I threw everything in the kitchen sink at this man to try and get him off. And he did the reverse to me to try and reel me in. And like we couldn't change it. It was at 2K and we got to the final bit. We're like a kilometre from the checkpoint, and he caught me. Like my head torch had frozen solid. I had to find a spare one, blah, blah, blah. And he caught me. And we walked in the last kilometre together, and it was the best part of the whole day. We're two guys, we're dads, got kids, partners. Beautiful. We talked about how shit the race was and all that kind of stuff. And the next day, we're going back and forth the next day, changing positions of being in front. And I realised that I, up until that point, had defined success for me in that entire race was about beating him. I had to conquer someone else. And then I went, I'm trying to conquer myself, because the first 4 days of the race, I literally didn't think I'd survive. I thought there's no way we finish this. I'm going to try and live long enough to find the exit door. And then I realised that you're actually going to finish, you're going to podium one way or the other anyway in a ridiculous race. Why do you have to conquer him? Like, you're just trying to conquer yourself. That's enough. Like that. And then your entire experience is completely different. And I caught it at the last checkpoint. He was coming out of the checkpoint and I was going in. And I said to him, I said, dude, you're going to win. Like, I'm not going to catch you now. Like, you got a 4-hour lead on me. Like, you're going to, this fan, I'm so happy for you. And he burst into tears and he's like, it's finally my time. Like, this is my moment. And I realized I was happier for him to win than I was for me to finish. And it's like, it suddenly felt like a very, very healthy way to race and compete.
Yeah, man.
And it's like, but you don't get that experience in a structured, standardized, ranked setting of how do you teach kids to go,
it's not what
it's good to compete, but it's also good to, how do you compete in a healthy manner? And like, I'm 47, I'm only just getting my head around it. Like, I don't know. It's just, it was a real epiphany for me in that race to understand that I couldn't measure my success based on conquering other people, because it was a fool's errand, versus if I'm happy for him and happy for me, I just like 10x the entire experience for myself. And I don't know how that works for kids, other than you just have to go out and do shit. Like, you have to go out and do stuff and experience it and take all the hits and the wins and the scrapes and the scars and all of it. But just go out and do shit and then learn from that. And how we teach that, I don't know yet, other than me going around telling them to go do shit. That's what I do. Go out and do hard stuff and screw it up and then do it again. I don't know. That was just a story for me that you kind of triggered for me in your discussion, Chris.
Perfect. And that, it's actually a perfect sentiment to sort of end this episode on, as a matter of fact. That's a really profound moral, I think. Paul, thanks for your time today. We could. We'll bring you back for season 2. But before you go, if people want to get in touch with you, because you do keynote speaking, you do workshops, you do all sorts of things. Like, where's the best contacts for people? He does.
2 options.
And if you, go.
PaulWatkins.com.au. That's my website. You'll find me in all my details there, or jump on LinkedIn. I'm on there quite a lot. Have a lot of conversations there, pump out a lot of stuff there. So either way, you'll track me down. That's probably your best place to find me.
Definitely recommend LinkedIn, because some of Paul's photography, from being, in the Arctic or on top of mountains, and obviously he's an amazing storyteller, which you can tell, but there's some substance and philosophy and wisdom behind it.
Thanks,
it's earned, is the point. It's not publicity, it's earned knowledge. And I got a lot of respect for the guy, which is the reason why he's here. That's it. Fantastic. This is episode 9. Brody, we got one more episode and we're wrapping up season 1. I know, man, we're very popular.
I'm impressed.
On that, Brody,
I'm surprised, like, wow. Like, no, I'm impressed with
I know, but hey, between books and everything else that's been going on, and like trying to stay busy. So if you want to get in touch with it, Brody, where can people find you?
You can go to promisfitspodcast.com. All of our relevant links there, or listen to the podcast. You can find me at my TikTok or LinkedIn, and
Likewise, you can find us, promisfits.com is the website for my links, for the podcast, all the rest of it, my website. Find us on LinkedIn. We're all friends. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Paul, thank you very much for your time. I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And you stay classy, Misfits. We'll see you on the next one.